In 9 AD, 3 Roman legions were wiped out in the Teutoburg forest. It was Rome's worst defeat in centuries, and the empire swore revenge. A few years later, 5,000 Roman soldiers marched into Germania against 40,000 warriors, and this time Rome would not be humiliated. In 9 AD, Rome suffered a catastrophe unlike anything in its recent history. 3 entire legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, were annihilated in the forests of Teutoburg. Their commander, Publius Quinctilius Varus, was betrayed by Arminius, a Germanic noble who had once served in the Roman army. Lured into the swamps and forests, Rome's disciplined formations broke apart under relentless ambushes. For 3 days, Germanic warriors rained spears and arrows from hidden positions, cutting the legions to pieces. When the slaughter ended, more than 20,000 Roman soldiers lay dead. Their eagle standards were captured, their bodies left to rot, and the survivors enslaved or sacrificed in grisly rituals. News of the disaster sent shockwaves through the empire. Emperor Augustus, upon hearing it, was said to have wandered his palace in despair, crying out, "Varus, give me back my legions." This was more than a military defeat. It was a national humiliation. Rome, the master of the Mediterranean, had been shattered by tribes it considered uncivilized. Germania, once thought conquerable, now became a land of fear. Its dark forests a symbol of Rome's vulnerability. From that moment on, revenge was inevitable. The disaster of Teutoburg was not just a scar. It was an open wound that Rome could not ignore. For years, Germania became a frontier of blood and vengeance. The Senate debated whether to abandon the lands east of the Rhine entirely, but pride demanded retaliation. And when Augustus died in 14 AD, his successor, Tiberius, turned to his adopted son, Germanicus Julius Caesar, to restore Roman honor. Germanicus was young, charismatic, and ambitious. He carried not only the prestige of the Julian bloodline, but also the loyalty of the legions. To the soldiers on the Rhine frontier, he was more than a commander. He was the embodiment of revenge. And in Germania, revenge meant one thing: the destruction of Arminius and his confederation. The first challenge came not from the Germans, but from Rome's own army. In 14 AD, shortly after Augustus's death, the Rhine legions mutinied. Harsh discipline, poor conditions, and the lure of reward drove thousands of soldiers into open revolt. For a moment, it seemed as if Rome might tear itself apart before even marching east. Germanicus personally confronted the mob, risking his life in the midst of armed soldiers. He offered concessions, better pay, shorter service, but also stood firm, reminding them that Rome's eyes were on them. In a display of both courage and political skill, he restored order. The legions were his again. Now he could turn their fury outward. Germanicus's strategy was methodical but relentless. He launched a series of campaigns deep into Germanic territory, moving beyond the Rhine with tens of thousands of men. Unlike Varus, he knew better than to trust Arminius's promises. Instead, he relied on reconnaissance, fortified camps, and overwhelming force. In 15 AD, Germanicus marched into the lands once held by Varus's lost legions. There, he uncovered the site of the Teutoburg massacre. The scene was haunting: bones scattered across the earth, skulls nailed to trees, rusted weapons lying in heaps. Surviving Roman prisoners were still enslaved in nearby villages. Tacitus records that Germanicus and his men gave the dead a proper burial, raising a great mound in their honor. For the soldiers, it was not just a funeral. It was a vow. They would not rest until the shame of Teutoburg was erased. That same year, Germanicus clashed with Arminius himself. The battle was indecisive, but it proved that Rome was back. The Germanic Confederation, once triumphant, now faced the full weight of Rome's war machine. Arminius, cunning as ever, avoided open field battles when possible, retreating into forests and marshes where his ambush tactics could thrive. But Germanicus adapted. His legions built bridges, drained swamps, and forced the Germans into combat. One of his early victories came at Idastaviso, near the Weser River. Here, Germanicus lured Arminius into battle on more open ground. The Roman legions, supported by cavalry and archers, clashed with tens of thousands of Germanic warriors. The fighting was brutal, hand to hand, shield against spear. Arminius fought with such ferocity that he was nearly killed, but he escaped into the forest, wounded yet unbroken. Rome claimed victory, and the eagle's standards lost at Teutoburg were finally recovered. The psychological blow to the Germans was immense. Germanicus pressed his advantage. In 16 AD, he launched another massive campaign, moving deeper into enemy territory than any Roman commander before him. He coordinated land and naval forces, sending fleets along the North Sea coast while legions advanced inland. The goal was to squeeze the Germanic tribes from multiple directions, denying them safe havens and forcing decisive engagements. At the Battle of the Angevarian Wall, Germanicus once again faced Arminius. The Germanic leader had rallied his warriors behind a defensive earthwork, hoping to repeat his earlier successes. But this time, the Romans were prepared. With siege tactics and disciplined formations, they breached the fortifications. The Germans broke under pressure, suffering heavy losses. Arminius retreated once more, his reputation still fierce but no longer untouchable. Tacitus describes Germanicus's campaigns as a mixture of brilliance and brutality. Villages were burned, hostages taken, and entire tribes forced into submission. Yet despite his victories, Germania remained unconquered. The forests swallowed armies, the rivers slowed supplies, and the tribes always regrouped. Arminius, though wounded in prestige, remained defiant. He mocked Roman proclamations of victory, insisting that freedom was worth any cost. Germanicus longed to finish the war once and for all, to crush Arminius completely and perhaps annex Germania as a Roman province. His soldiers adored him. His popularity in Rome was soaring, but politics intervened. Tiberius, wary of Germanicus's rising fame, recalled him to Rome in 17 AD. Officially, the campaigns were declared a success. Germanicus received a triumph, parading through the streets with spoils prisoners and the recovered eagles of Varus's legions. But in truth, Germania was never fully subdued. The frontier stabilized along the Rhine, and Rome never again attempted permanent conquest beyond it. Arminius survived for several more years before being betrayed and killed by rival Germanic leaders. Germanicus himself died young, under suspicious circumstances, fueling rumors of poison and political intrigue. Yet for a time, his campaigns had restored Roman pride. They proved that Rome could strike deep into Germania, defeat its fiercest warriors, and reclaim honor from the ashes of Teutoburg. The lesson of his campaigns was clear: Germania could be punished, but it could never truly be chained. Germanicus's revenge was both triumph and limitation. He gave Rome victories, but not conquest. He showed strength, but also revealed the futility of pushing too far into the endless forests. For the empire, Germania would remain a borderland, feared, respected, but never absorbed. And yet, the story did not end with Germanicus. For decades after his recall, Rome's northern frontier remained a theater of tension, with raids, skirmishes, and campaigns shaping the uneasy balance between empire and tribes. The memory of Teutoburg never faded, and the battles that followed became part of Rome's long, bloody dialogue with Germania. The disaster in the Teutoburg forest had left Rome scared. 3 entire legions were annihilated, their eagles captured, and their soldiers slaughtered in the swamps and forests of Germania. For years, the empire hesitated, its frontier fixed along the Rhine. But humiliation like this could not go unanswered. Rome's pride demanded vengeance, and the man chosen to lead that retribution was Germanicus Julius Caesar, the adopted son of Emperor Tiberius and one of Rome's most promising commanders. Germanicus was not just any general. He carried the blood of the Julii, related to Augustus through adoption, and represented the dynasty's future. His appointment to command in Germania carried immense weight. To Rome, he was not merely tasked with holding the frontier. He was sent to erase the memory of Teutoburg, to recover lost honor, and to make the tribes fear the legions again. But before he could even march east, Germanicus faced an immediate crisis. The death of Augustus in 14 AD triggered mutinies among the Rhine legions. Soldiers, long weary of campaigning in Germania's brutal forests and swamps, erupted in anger. They demanded higher pay, shorter service, and early discharge. The frontier, instead of standing as Rome's shield, now threatened to collapse under its own unrest. Germanicus responded with both authority and cunning. He addressed the mutineers directly, reminding them of Rome's glory, appealing to their loyalty. and even offering concessions to calm the storm. According to Tacitus, he even contemplated taking his own life to shock the soldiers into shame. The dramatic gesture worked. Discipline was restored, and Germanicus turned a potential disaster into a moment of loyalty. The legions that nearly broke now swore to follow him anywhere. The Rhine frontier was secure again, and Germanicus was free to begin Rome's revenge. In 14 AD, Germanicus launched his first campaign deep into Germania. The tribes that had united under Arminius during Teutoburg were still strong, but Rome now marched with discipline and purpose. Germanicus moved swiftly, targeting Arminius's allies and punishing those who had once taken Roman lands. His raids devastated villages, destroyed supply depots, and reminded the tribes that Rome's reach was far from broken. The following year, 15 AD, Germanicus struck harder. He led multiple legions deep into enemy territory, pushing across the Rhine in force. This was no cautious frontier defense. This was an invasion meant to terrorize and destabilize Germania. Roman columns advanced through marshes and forests, burning settlements and cutting down resistance wherever it appeared. Arminius, once hailed as a savior by the tribes, now faced the full weight of Rome's vengeance. One of Germanicus' most symbolic victories came not on the battlefield, but in what he captured. He took into custody the wife of Arminius, Thusnelda, along with her father Segestes, who had defected to Rome. This was more than a family affair. It was propaganda. The man who had humiliated Rome at Teutoburg could not even protect his own household. Arminius' rage was legendary when he learned of Thusnelda's capture. But Germanicus had made his point. Rome could strike at the very heart of its enemies. During these campaigns, Germanicus also sought to heal Rome's deepest wound. He returned to the battlefield of the Teutoburg disaster. Tacitus records that he and his soldiers walked through the haunting ruins of Varus's defeat. Bleached bones lay scattered in the soil, broken weapons still embedded in the ground, and skulls hung nailed to trees by the Germanic tribes. Roman survivors who had escaped told tales of their comrades tortured and sacrificed to pagan gods. Germanicus ordered the remains of the fallen gathered and buried with honor. For his soldiers, it was an act of mourning and a promise that their deaths would be avenged. The psychological effect of this act was immense. The legions, who had once whispered in fear of Teutoburg, now marched with fury. They were no longer haunted by ghosts, they were marching to redeem them. Germanicus' early campaigns did not yet deliver a final blow to Arminius, but they reshaped the conflict. For the first time since 9 AD, the tribes were on the defensive. The Romans had shown that they could push deep into Germania, raid villages, take captives, and even strike at Arminius personally. Every action, every march, was meant to send a clear message: the humiliation of Teutoburg would not define Rome. Still, the war was far from over. Arminius remained at large, rallying warriors with his fiery speeches, calling on the tribes to resist foreign rule. Germanicus knew that the time was coming for a decisive confrontation. Raids and skirmishes could only go so far. To truly restore Rome's prestige, he would have to defeat Arminius in open battle, and that clash was drawing near. By 16 AD, Germanicus was ready to deliver the strike that Rome had been waiting for since the nightmare of Teutoburg. 2 years of raids and punitive expeditions had weakened the Germanic alliance, but Arminius remained a defiant symbol of resistance. The Cherusci chieftain, once Rome's trusted ally, had become its greatest enemy. For Rome, the war was no longer about borders or resources. It was about honor, revenge, and the restoration of imperial prestige. Germanicus prepared carefully. He called on 8 legions, nearly 40,000 infantry, supported by cavalry and auxiliaries, one of the largest forces ever assembled on the northern frontier. His fleet sailed along the North Sea coast, transporting supplies and reinforcements to outflank the enemy. The strategy was ambitious, meant to outmaneuver Arminius and trap his forces between river and legion. Every move carried the weight of Rome's pride. Arminius, however, was no fool. He knew the forests and swamps better than any Roman commander, and he sought once again to use the terrain to his advantage. He rallied the tribes to ambush the advancing legions near the Weser River, at a place later remembered as Ida Staviso. For the Germans, the plan was simple: lure the Romans into confined terrain, strike with speed and ferocity, and recreate the disaster of Teutoburg. For the Romans, the battle was about proving that they had learned from past mistakes. Tacitus records the drama vividly. As the Germanic warriors gathered, Arminius rode among them, his face marked with scars, his words fiery. He reminded them of Varus, of the slaughtered legions, of Rome's arrogance. He promised that their forests would devour the Romans again. His speech stirred the tribes to a frenzy. Warriors painted their bodies, raised their spears, and prepared to fight with the ferocity of men defending their homeland. Germanicus, meanwhile, rallied his men with equal determination. He reminded them that the ghosts of Teutoburg were watching, that today's battle was their chance to erase disgrace and write a new legacy. For the legionaries who had marched through the bones of their fallen comrades just months before, no words were needed. Their silence was filled with vengeance. The battle erupted as Germanicus advanced his legions in disciplined formations, shields locked, standards raised high. Unlike Varus years earlier, he avoided long, vulnerable columns in swampy ground. Instead, he pressed forward in force, with cavalry protecting the flanks and artillery covering the advance. The Romans had adapted, and that adaptation would prove fatal for Arminius. The Germanic tribes charged with their usual fury, rushing from forests and hills with spears, swords, and shields of wood and hide. Their war cries echoed across the river valley. For a moment, chaos threatened to engulf the Roman line. But discipline held. Roman pila heavy javelins darkened the sky, cutting down charging warriors before they reached the shields. Then the legionaries advanced step by step, stabbing with their short swords, cutting through the looser tribal formations. Tacitus notes that Germanicus himself was in the thick of the action, urging his men forward, promising rewards for victory. Auxiliary cavalry swept around the flanks, cutting off retreat. The Roman advance became a crushing wall of iron, pushing the Germans into the river and hills. Arminius fought fiercely, covered in blood and mud, but even his charisma could not hold the collapsing line. The battle turned into a rout. Thousands of tribesmen were cut down. Many drowned in the Weser while trying to escape. Others were hunted down by Roman cavalry. The legions, fueled by years of humiliation, gave no mercy. Tacitus describes the ground littered with corpses, the river running red, the trees hung with the bodies of the defeated. For Rome, it was catharsis. The shame of Teutoburg had been avenged, at least in part. Germanicus ordered trophies raised, including the recovered eagles of the lost legions. The victory was not just military, it was symbolic. It told the world that Rome could bleed, but it would never stay defeated. And yet, even in victory, the war was not over. Arminius escaped, badly wounded but still alive. The tribes, though shattered, did not surrender. Germania remained wild, unconquered, its people scattered but unbroken. Germanicus had won battles, but the land itself still resisted. Back in Rome, news of Itus Diviso electrified the empire. After years of despair, senators celebrated. Poets praised Germanicus as the savior of Roman honor, and soldiers sang of vengeance fulfilled. But in the imperial palace, Tiberius, ever cautious and jealous, looked at his adopted son's growing fame with suspicion. For him, victories were dangerous when they made generals too popular. Germanicus had proven Rome's strength, but questions lingered. Should the empire continue pouring blood into Germania, or was it wiser to secure the Rhine and accept the limits of conquest? The answer would define not just Germanicus' fate, but the future of Rome's frontier. After the bloodbath at Itus Diviso, Rome celebrated. Songs of vengeance echoed in the camps, and the legions felt they had finally avenged their dead comrades of Teutoburg. But Germanicus was not done. For him, a single victory could not erase the stain of 9 AD. He wanted to crush Arminius completely, to shatter the Germanic alliance and secure Germania as Rome's own. The next campaign brought him deeper into enemy territory. Arminius, though wounded, remained defiant. He rallied the tribes once more and fortified a position near what Roman sources called the Angravarian Wall, an earthen rampart or natural embankment that gave the tribes a defensive edge. Here, the Germans would make their stand. It was not a trap in the forests, but a face-to-face challenge, a line of warriors defending their homeland against Rome's disciplined advance. Germanicus prepared carefully. He deployed legions in solid formations, auxiliaries on the flanks, and cavalry positioned for encirclement. The battle was brutal. The tribes fought with ferocity, their chieftains urging them on, their cries echoing across the ramparts. Roman pilla rained down, breaking shields and spears, before legionaries surged forward in tight ranks. The clash at the wall was hand to hand, shield against shield, sword against axe. Tacitus records that the fighting was so intense that for a moment it seemed the Germans might hold. But Rome's discipline prevailed. The legions hacked through the defenders, auxiliaries flanked from the sides, and cavalry pressed from behind. When the line finally broke, it collapsed into a massacre. Arminius barely escaped with his life. Fleeing into the forests once again, the tribes scattered and Germanicus claimed another triumph. In 2 years, he had recovered lost eagles, avenged Teutoburg, and crushed the greatest tribal coalition Germania had ever mustered. The men idolized him. His name spread across the empire. In Rome, he was hailed as the rising star of the dynasty, the adopted son of Emperor Tiberius, a general whose victories recalled the glory days of Caesar. Statues were raised, coins minted, and prayers offered in his honor. But success on the battlefield did not guarantee success in politics. Tiberius, sitting in Rome, viewed Germanicus' growing fame with unease. The emperor was cautious, pragmatic, and deeply suspicious. Germania, in his eyes, was a swamp of endless wars and little reward. It had no golden temples like Egypt, no fertile fields like Gaul, no wealthy cities to tax. It was wilderness, costly, brutal, and barren. Tacitus suggests that Tiberius feared Germanicus' popularity more than he valued Germania's conquest. A general adored by his men, celebrated by the Senate, and beloved by the people was always a dangerous figure in imperial politics. Caesar himself had once used military glory to topple the Republic. Augustus had ruled with an iron balance of power. Tiberius knew the dangers of ambition, so in 17 AD, despite the victories, despite the momentum, Germanicus was recalled. Officially, it was presented as a triumph. He returned to Rome in glory, parading prisoners, trophies, and the recovered eagles of Varus' lost legions. Crowds cheered him, senators hailed him, and Rome celebrated. Germanicus was granted a triumphal procession, one of the highest honors any Roman could receive. But beneath the spectacle lay bitterness. Germania remained unconquered. The frontier was not pushed to the Elbe but stabilized on the Rhine. The Teutoburg disaster had been avenged but not reversed. Rome had proven its strength yet chose to stop short of annexation. To some, it was prudence. To others, it was weakness. For Germanicus himself, the recall was a humiliation hidden in gold. He had given Rome victory, but he had been denied conquest. He would never finish the war he had begun. Instead, Tiberius sent him east to govern the provinces of Asia, a prestigious but less dangerous assignment. There, Germanicus would continue to win admiration and, suspiciously, meet an early death. The aftermath of his campaigns left a paradox. Militarily, Germanicus had proven that Rome could crush the tribes in open battle. Psychologically, he restored Roman pride. Strategically, however, Germania remained a nightmare. Every victory cost blood and treasure far out of proportion to the gain. The tribes never surrendered. They simply scattered and returned. The forests, swamps, and weather remained relentless enemies. Rome's leadership took the lesson. Germania was not worth the price. Instead of endless campaigns, they fortified the Rhine, turning it into one of the empire's strongest frontiers. Beyond it lay a wild, untamed world Rome would never fully master. Arminius survived, scarred but still leading resistance. He became a symbol of freedom, though tribal rivalries eventually consumed him. Germanicus, meanwhile, died young, mourned as the empire's lost hope. Tacitus portrays him as a tragic hero, victorious but restrained, brilliant but cut down by politics. And in the end, Germania remained what it had always been, a land that resisted empire. Rome had sent its legions, its generals, its fury, and yet the frontier never moved. The Teutoburg forest remained a scar, Itis Diviso a fleeting triumph, and the Angevarian Wall a reminder that even Rome's greatest commanders could not bend the land to their will. The story of Germanicus in Germania was not just about war. It was about the limits of empire, the clash between ambition and reality, the struggle between glory and survival. For Rome, Germania was both victory and failure, triumph and futility. It was a chapter that revealed the empire's power and its boundaries. When Germanicus was recalled in 17 AD, the legions on the Rhine sighed with both relief and regret. Relief, because years of grueling campaigns in the forests had cost them dearly. Regret, because they felt they had been on the brink of turning Germania into another Roman province. Yet the truth was harsher. Germania was never going to become Gaul, Hispania, or Egypt. It was a frontier that resisted empire, and Rome's leaders knew it. The first consequence was strategic. Instead of pressing east toward the Elbe, Rome drew back to the Rhine. Fortresses like Vetera, Mogontiacum, and Argentoratum became permanent bastions. Supply depots, legionary bases, and roads were concentrated on the western side of the river. The dream of pushing Rome's limes deep into Central Europe ended. For centuries afterward, the Rhine remained not just a river but a line, a psychological border that defined Rome's strength on one side and acknowledged freedom on the other. Had Germania been conquered, the map of Europe might look very different today. Roman culture, language, and law could have spread across lands that would later produce the Franks, Saxons, and Germans. Instead, these tribes remained independent, growing into the medieval powers that would one day challenge the legacy of Rome. In a sense, the decision to stop in Germania shaped all of European history. The second consequence was political. Germanicus' recall revealed the deep tension between military glory and imperial control. Rome could not afford another Caesar, a general so adored by his soldiers that he could threaten the state itself. Tiberius feared this, and his caution, some would call it paranoia, ensured that Germania remained unconquered. For the Senate and people of Rome, it was a bitter pill. They saw a brilliant commander denied his chance, and an empire admitting its limits. Tacitus later wrote with sorrow and anger, portraying Germanicus as a tragic hero, a man destined for greatness but cut down by jealousy at the top. The third consequence was psychological. The Teutoburg disaster of 9 AD had scarred Rome. Even after Itus Diviso and the Angevarian Wall, the wound never truly healed. Augustus' cry, "Varus, give me back my legions!" remained etched in Roman memory. The recovered eagles brought back some pride, but the humiliation lingered. Germania became a land associated with loss, with ambush, with fear. Legionaries stationed on the frontier whispered stories of ghosts in the forests, of cursed ground where 3 legions had perished. Even when victories came, they felt temporary, as if the land itself resisted Roman order. Economically, the frontier was a drain. Germania offered little in return for endless campaigns. No great cities to tax, no mines of silver or gold, no fertile plains like Egypt's Nile. What it had was forest swamp and a scattering of villages. Rome could conquer, burn, and kill, but it could not profit. Every campaign required massive investment, ships to ferry supplies up the Rhine, roads cut through forests, garrisons built and abandoned. The cost in coin was staggering, and the Senate knew it. Why bleed treasure into a land that gave nothing back? For the Germans, the story was different. Arminius became a legend. Though he was eventually killed by rival tribes, his victory at Teutoburg gave his people a symbol of resistance. He was remembered not just as a chieftain, but as the man who humbled Rome. Centuries later, German nationalists in the 19th century would resurrect his name as Hermann, celebrating him as the father of their nation. The forests of Germany still hold monuments to him today, but Arminius' legacy was complicated. His victory preserved tribal freedom, but his people never united into a lasting state. Rome had centralized power, Germania remained fractured. The tribes fought each other as much as they fought Rome. Arminius' greatness lay in forging unity for a moment, but when he died, that unity dissolved. The Germans survived, but they did not become a nation. They became a constant thorn on Rome's frontier, raiding, harassing, and resisting assimilation, but never creating an empire of their own. The final consequence was cultural. Germania became a frontier myth. To Roman writers, it was the land of barbarians, wild, untamed, dangerous. Tacitus of Germania described the tribes as both savage and noble, free of the corruption of Rome, yet also doomed to endless violence. To the legions, it was a place of hardship, where the discipline of the camp was tested against hunger, cold, and fear. To the emperors, it was a warning that not all lands could be tamed. And so Germania remained outside Rome. The Rhine frontier held for centuries, but pressure from beyond it never ceased. Tribes like the Alemanni, the Goths, and the Franks would eventually pour across the river in later centuries, when Rome's strength waned. The decision not to conquer Germania in the 1st century set the stage for the invasions that helped bring the empire down in the 5th. Rome's choice to stop at the Rhine preserved its strength in the short term, but in the long term, it left an enemy unbroken. When we look back, the story of Rome in Germania is one of ambition checked by reality. It was not that Rome lacked soldiers. Germanicus proved they could win battles. It was not that Rome lacked courage. Legionaries fought with discipline, even in the darkest forests. It was not even that Rome lacked strategy. Its generals adapted, learned, and struck back with precision. The failure was deeper. It was the land itself, the endless forests, the swamps, the rain, and the refusal of the tribes to play Rome's game. Empire depends on roads, on cities, on rulers to bribe. Germania had none of these. Rome could win battles, but it could not win the land. The lesson shaped the empire's future. Instead of endless expansion, Rome began to build walls. Hadrian's Wall in Britain, the Limes fortifications across the Rhine and Danube, defensive frontiers that said, "Here we stop." Germania was the beginning of that shift, the first great admission that Rome's power had limits. For us today, the story remains gripping because it asks a timeless question. What happens when unstoppable power meets immovable resistance? Rome was the greatest military machine of its age, yet in the forests of Germany, it met something it could not break. And in that struggle, Varus' disaster, Germanicus' victories, and Tiberius' caution, we see the truth that even empires are mortal. The clash between Rome and Germania was not just a chapter of history, it was a turning point. It showed that expansion has costs, that ambition has boundaries, and that no power, no matter how mighty, can conquer everything. Germania stood unconquered, and in doing so, it helped shape the destiny of Europe.